I sat in that chair, the one with the stiff leather that squeaked every time I shifted. The office was too clean, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. The oncologist sat across from me, his face calm but his eyes heavy with words I didn't want to hear. He had a folder in front of him, thick with papers and scans, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to. I already knew what was coming. "Maxwell," he began, his voice steady but soft, like he was trying to cushion the blow. "The disease has progressed faster than we anticipated. The treatments we've tried, they're not working." I stared at him, my mind racing but my body frozen. I'd built my life on control, on making the impossible happen. I'd turned a small tech startup into an empire. I'd outmaneuvered rivals, closed deals that seemed doomed, and always come out on top. But this wasn't a boardroom negotiation. This wasn't something I could fix with a phone call or a stack of cash. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. He hesitated, and that's when I knew. There were no good options. Just experimental treatments with slim odds and harsh side effects. He laid it all out, numbers and percentages, but the words blurred together. All I heard was the unspoken truth. This was a fight I might not win. I thanked him, short, clipped, the way I always did when I wanted to end a conversation. Then I stood, my legs feeling heavier than they should, and walked out. The sunlight hit me like a slap, bright and blinding after the dim, sterile office. The city buzzed around me, cars honking, people rushing, life moving on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I stood there for a moment, my hand gripping the strap of my bag too tightly. I could feel the cracks in my armor, the ones I'd spent years building. I'd always been the guy who could handle anything, the guy who didn't break. But this was different. I couldn't let anyone see this, not my board, not my competitors, not the media. They'd smell weakness like sharks in the water. They'd tear me apart. No, I had to keep this to myself. I had to figure out how to face this on my own terms. I started walking, my shoes clicking against the pavement. The city felt too loud, too chaotic, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had a plan, or at least the start of one. If I couldn't control the disease, I could control how I dealt with it. And that meant disappearing, at least for a while. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. As I walked, my mind kept circling back to one thought. This might be my last chance to live for something other than money. I'd spent so much of my life chasing success, building an empire, proving I was the best. But now I wasn't so sure what any of it was worth. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep living the way I had been. I needed to find something real, something that mattered, and I needed to do it fast. I got back to my penthouse and locked the door behind me. The place was quiet, too quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off the city skyline, all glittering lights and endless motion, but it felt empty, like a stage set. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway and just stared at myself. There I was, Maxwell Kane. The suit was custom made, the watch cost more than most people's cars, and my hair, perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. I looked like success, but for the first time, I didn't feel like it. I started peeling it all off, the jacket first, then the tie, the watch, the shoes. I undid the cufflinks and rolled up my sleeves. I ran a hand through my hair, messing it up, letting it fall how it wanted. When I was done, I was just a guy in jeans and a plain white t-shirt. No empire, no billions, no mask, just me. It felt strange, freeing, but also scary, like I was shedding armor I didn't even realize I was wearing. I grabbed my phone and called Evelyn. She's been my assistant for years, the one person I trust completely. She picked up on the first ring, like always. "Maxwell?" she said, her voice calm and steady. "What do you need?" I took a deep breath. "I need to disappear." There was a pause on the other end, but she didn't ask questions. She never did. "Okay," she said. "What's the plan?" I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I didn't mention the diagnosis, not yet, but I explained that I needed a new identity, something simple, no money, no power, no connections, just a guy trying to make ends meet. "Call me Max," I said. "Max, the rideshare driver." Evelyn didn't miss a beat. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Give me 24 hours. I hung up and sat down on the edge of my bed. The penthouse felt too big, too quiet. I looked around at all the things I'd collected over the years. The art, the furniture, the gadgets. None of it meant anything right now. For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than stress or ambition. It was excitement, but not the kind I was used to. This wasn't about closing a deal or winning a fight. This was about living, really living. I thought about what I was about to do. Step away from everything I'd built, become someone else. It was crazy, but it also felt right. If I was going to face what was coming, I wanted to do it as me, not Maxwell Kane, the billionaire. Just Max. I didn't know what I'd find out there, but I knew one thing. This might be my last chance to figure out what really matters. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. As I sat there, staring at the city lights, I realized something. All my life, I'd been chasing success, thinking it would make me happy. But now I just wanted to know if someone could love me, for me, not for my money, not for my power, just for who I am. It was a scary thought, but also kind of thrilling. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose. And it had nothing to do with money. I'd been driving for hours, just another face in the crowd. The app on my phone pinged with ride requests, but I ignored most of them. I wasn't really doing this for the money. I was doing it to disappear, to blend in, to be someone else for a while. I turned down a quiet street in a part of the city I didn't know well. The houses were small but neat, with flower pots on porches and kids' bikes left in driveways. It felt real, lived in, not like the polished glass towers I was used to. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the sidewalk, helping an older woman carry groceries. The older woman was struggling with a heavy bag, but the younger one, Eliza, I'd learn later, just smiled and took it from her like it was nothing. She moved so easily, like helping people was second nature to her. I slowed down, watching them. Eliza laughed at something the older woman said, and the sound was warm, genuine. It hit me in a way I didn't expect. I hadn't heard a laugh like that I couldn't even remember. Before I could think too much about it, I rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I called out, trying to sound casual. Eliza looked up, surprised. She hesitated, glancing at the older woman, then back at me. Sure," she said finally. "If you don't mind." "Hop in," I said, trying to sound like a guy who did this kind of thing every day. She helped the older woman into the back seat, then slid into the front beside me. "Thanks," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "I'm just a few blocks away." "No problem," I said, pulling back onto the road. We drove in silence for a minute, But it wasn't awkward. Eliza seemed comfortable, like she didn't feel the need to fill the quiet with small talk. I liked that about her already. "So," I said finally, glancing at her, "you always helping strangers carry groceries?" She laughed, and there it was again, that warm, easy sound. "Only when they need it," she said. "I volunteer at the community center down the street. A lot of the folks there don't have much help, so I try to step in when I can." "That's really nice of you," I said, and I meant it. She shrugged like it was no big deal. "It's just what you do, you know. People need help, you help them." I didn't know, actually. I'd spent most of my life focused on myself, on building something bigger, better, faster. Helping people had never been part of the plan. But hearing her talk about it, seeing the way her face lit up, it stirred something in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. We pulled up to her place a few minutes later, a small apartment building with a faded awning. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me. "Thanks for the ride," she said, smiling. "You're a lifesaver." "Anytime," I said, and I realized I meant it. She got out of the car, and I watched her walk up the steps, her movements easy and confident. For the first time in a long time, I felt curious about her, about the life she lived, about the kind of person who could make helping others look so effortless. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about her, Eliza. There was something about her that felt real, genuine, not like the people I usually spent time with, where every conversation felt like a game, every smile like a mask. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd met someone who didn't care about money or power or status. Someone who just cared. And it made me wonder if I could ever be like that. If I could ever be someone who mattered for more than just what I had. I didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. I didn't plan to go back. Really, I didn't. But something about Eliza stuck with me. That laugh, the way she talked about helping people like it was the most natural thing in the world. It kept playing in my head like a song I couldn't shake. So the next day, I found myself driving back to that neighborhood. The community center wasn't hard to find. It was a small brick building with a sign out front that had seen better days. The paint was chipped and the letters were faded, but there was something welcoming about it, like it didn't need to be fancy to do its job. I parked the car and sat there for a minute, staring at the building. What was I even doing here? I wasn't a volunteer. I wasn't even Max, not really. But before I could talk myself out of it, I got out and walked inside. The first thing I noticed was the noise. Not the kind of noise I was used to. Phones ringing, people talking over each other in meetings. But something warmer. Laughter. Music. The sound of people actually living. I followed the sound down a hallway and into a bright room filled with tables and chairs. A group of people sat around one of the tables, paintbrushes in hand, while Eliza stood at the front, guiding them through some kind of art project. She looked up and saw me, and for a second, she looked surprised. But then she smiled, and it was like the whole room got a little brighter. "Max," she said, waving me over, "what are you doing here?" I shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward. I thought I'd check the place out, see what you were talking about." Her smile widened. "Well, come on in. We could always use an extra pair of hands." She introduced me to the group as a new volunteer, and before I knew it, I was sitting next to a boy in a wheelchair, helping him paint a landscape. His name was Jake, and he was maybe 10 years old, with a big smile and even bigger ideas about what his painting should look like. "The sky should be purple," he said, pointing at the paper. "And the trees should have polka dots." I laughed. Purple sky and polka dot trees, I like it. We worked together, dipping brushes into paint and filling the paper with colors. Jake chatted the whole time, telling me about his favorite video games and how he wanted to be an astronaut someday. I listened, really listened, and it hit me how little I'd done that in my old life. I looked around the room. Everyone was focused on their projects, but there was this sense of connection, like they were all in it together, no matter what they were dealing with outside these walls. Eliza moved around the room, stopping to help here, offering encouragement there. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, like they mattered. And for the first time, I realized how far removed my life had been from something like this. I'd spent years chasing money, success, power. I thought it would make me happy. But sitting there, helping Jake paint his purple sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the community center, about Jake and his polka-dot trees, about Eliza and the way she made helping people look so easy. I'd spent my whole life building an empire, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me. But sitting in that room, surrounded by laughter and color, I realized something. I'd been chasing the wrong thing. Money couldn't buy what I'd felt today. Success couldn't give me that sense of connection. For the first time, I started to wonder if I'd been looking for happiness in all the wrong places. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find it here. It had been a good day. One of those days where everything felt lighter. I'd spent the morning at the community center, helping Eliza set up for an event. It was nothing fancy, just a little party for the kids and their families, but it felt important, like we were building something real. We were cleaning up afterward, stacking chairs, my vision blurred, and I had to grab the edge of the table to steady myself. "Max?" Eliza's voice cut through the fog. "Are you okay?" I blinked, trying to clear my head. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." She didn't look convinced. Her eyes narrowed as she studied me, and I could see the worry in them. "You're pale," she said. "Sit down. I'll get you some water." I wanted to argue, to tell her I was fine, but the truth was, I didn't trust my legs to hold me up much longer. So I sat, leaning back in the chair and closing my eyes for a second. When I opened them, Eliza was standing in front of me, holding out a bottle of water. "Here," she said. "Drink this." I took it, nodding my thanks. The water was cold, and it helped a little, but I could still feel her eyes on me. "You've been working too much," she said, crossing her arms, "driving all those hours, then coming here to help out. You need to take care of yourself, Max." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. The guilt was already creeping in, sharp and heavy. She was worried about me, and here I was, lying to her face. But what could I say? That I wasn't just tired? That my body was betraying me in ways I couldn't control? No, I couldn't do that to her. Not yet. "I'll be fine," I said finally, forcing another smile. "Just need to get some rest." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she sat down next to me, her expression softening. "You know, you don't have to do everything on your own," she said quietly. "It's okay to ask for help." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second I wanted to tell her everything, about the diagnosis, the treatments, the fear that never really went away. But the words stuck in my throat. "Thanks," I said instead, my voice rough. "I'll keep that in mind," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good, because we need you around here, Max. You're part of this now." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Part of this. Part of something real. It was what I'd been looking for, wasn't it? But how could I be part of anything when I was keeping such a big secret? As I drove home that night, Eliza's words echoed in my head. "You're part of this now." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe I could belong somewhere, that I could be more than just the guy with the money and the power. But how could I, when I was lying to everyone around me? The guilt was like a weight pressing down on my chest. Eliza cared about me. She trusted me. And here I was, hiding the truth from her. But I wasn't ready to tell her. Not yet. I didn't want to see the pity in her eyes, or worse, the fear. I didn't want to burden her with something she couldn't fix. So I kept driving, the city lights blurring past my window, and I told myself, just a little longer. I'd tell her the truth. Just a little longer. Running a company like mine means everyone notices when you disappear. I tried to keep things quiet, stepping back just a little, but it wasn't long before the board started asking questions. They always want answers, always need to know what's going on. To them, my absence was a big flashing warning sign. It started with Cameron, my COO. He's always been ambitious. Sharp suit, smooth smile, the kind of guy who doesn't miss a thing. I can tell he's waiting for me to stumble, to slip up so he can prove he's the one who should be in charge. He called an emergency meeting saying we needed to align on our vision going forward. That's business speak for, what the hell is going on? I sat at the end of the conference table, the only seat that ever felt comfortable. Cameron leaned forward, his hands folded in front of him, and gave me this look, like he was dissecting me with his eyes. "Maxwell," he said, voice calm but firm, "we need some clarity here. The team's been, unsettled. You've been away more than usual, and we're not hearing a lot about the why." I just nodded and kept my face blank. "I've been taking some personal time," I said. "Nothing more to it." "Personal time?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, in the middle of a major expansion. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I trust you all to keep things running smoothly in my absence." The other board members looked around, unsure if they should push further. Cameron didn't hesitate. "Maxwell, with all due respect, the company needs strong leadership right now. If there's something going on..." "There's nothing going on," I interrupted. "This is a temporary situation. Everything's under control." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. I had no choice but to leave it at that. After the meeting, I told Evelyn, my assistant, to field any questions. "Tell them I'm focusing on strategic priorities," I said. It was vague, corporate, and just believable enough to keep most people quiet. For now. But Cameron wasn't buying it. I could see it in his eyes as he left the room. He'd start digging, and when Cameron digs, he usually finds something. I had to act fast. My two lives, Maxwell the billionaire CEO and Max the struggling driver, were starting to bleed into each other. The walls I'd built between them weren't as solid as I thought. If Cameron kept pulling at those threads, I knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. I knew it was coming. Cameron wasn't the kind of guy to let something slip past him. One day, after a tense board meeting, he called me into a quiet side room. I followed him in, my gut already twisting. The moment he closed the door, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. He leaned against the table, his arms crossed, his smile tight. "Maxwell," he said, "we both know something's been unusual lately. I've done a little digging." I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, waiting for him to get to the point. "I know about the illness," he said after a pause, his voice dropping just enough to sound like he cared. "And the driver act? Clever. Really clever." My chest tightened. I thought I'd been careful. But of course Cameron was always watching, always waiting for a crack in the foundation. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. No sense in pretending I didn't know where this was going. He pushed off the table and took a step closer. "You can't run this company in your condition," he said. "It's time to let someone more capable take over. Someone who can keep things steady. I'm not asking you to walk away completely. Just step back. Let me handle the day-to-day." It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. He wasn't offering help. He was making a move, a calculated one. I felt tired, more than I ever had before. For months, I'd been juggling this secret, living two lives, and now Cameron held the one thing I feared most over my head. But instead of panic, something else rose inside me. A deep, quiet clarity. "No," I said simply. Cameron blinked, thrown off for just a second. "No?" he repeated. "I'm not stepping back," I said. "And you're not going to expose anything." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't think I will?" "You could," I said, meeting his eyes. "But if you do, I'll take the choice away from you. I'll tell everyone myself." That stopped him. For once, Cameron didn't have a quick response. He hadn't counted on me being willing to step into the light on my own terms. "I'm tired of hiding," I said. "If the board and the public find out, they'll find out. But it'll be because I chose to tell them, not because you pushed me into a corner." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, a cold smile on his face. "Your call," he said. "We'll see how long you last." I watched him leave, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. For the first time in months, I felt something like relief. The lies, the double life, it wasn't working anymore. If honesty was going to cost me, so be it. I wasn't going to let Cameron hold my future in his hands. If I was going to face the truth, it would be on my terms. I stood in front of the camera, the lights bright on my face. A simple podium separated me from the world. Behind me, a screen showed the Kane Corp logo. I could feel the weight of what I was about to say pressing down on my chest. My heart raced, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. For years I had lived behind a polished image. Maxwell Kane, the untouchable billionaire. I wore the suit of a man who never made mistakes, who never faltered. But today, I wasn't that man. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I gripped the edges of the podium and looked into the camera. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "I'm Maxwell Kane, and I need to be honest with you. I owe that to my employees, my investors, and to everyone who believed in me." The room was quiet. I could imagine the thousands of people watching, some from their desks at headquarters, others in homes and boardrooms. I thought of Eliza. Was she watching too? "I've made mistakes," I continued. "In the pursuit of success, I've been ruthless. I've made decisions that hurt people. I've ignored what really matters: honesty, compassion, and trust. And for that, I'm deeply sorry." I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I said the part I had feared the most. A few months ago, I was diagnosed with a serious illness. I won't go into all the details, but it's something I've been fighting silently. I stepped away from my role to figure out who I was without the title, the wealth, the power. I wanted to know if there was more to me than the man you've read about in the papers. I saw some heads in the room drop, people glancing at their hands or shifting uncomfortably. Instead, it wasn't easy for them to hear this. It wasn't easy for me to say it. "I didn't want you to know because I was afraid," I admitted. "I was afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of losing the respect I worked so hard to earn. But I've learned something over the past few months. Strength isn't about pretending you're invincible. It's about facing the truth, no matter how hard it is." The words started to come more easily now. "I promise you this," I said. "From this day forward, I will lead with honesty. I will take responsibility for the harm I've done and work to make things right. I will focus on what really matters, building trust, making a difference, and showing that even a man like me can change." As I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, a few scattered claps turned into full applause. The people in the room, my team, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Real respect. Not fear or admiration for my money, but for my honesty. I stepped away from the podium, the cameras turning off, and let out a long breath. I knew it wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. For once, I didn't see Maxwell Cain, the untouchable billionaire. I just saw a man trying to do better. After I gave that speech, I knew the real work was just beginning. For too long, I'd focused only on my own success, my company, my empire, my image. I wanted to change that.
The first thing I did was set up a foundation. It wasn't just a flashy donation or a public relations stunt. This was personal. I called it the Cain Foundation for Rare Diseases. I put in a large chunk of my fortune, enough to fund research and support for people dealing with illnesses like mine. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt real. Next, I turned to the community center where Eliza worked. She'd shown me what it meant to care for others. Her work inspired me, and I wanted to help. I offered to fund their programs, everything from art classes to therapy sessions, and I promised them they'd never have to worry about closing their doors again. It wasn't just about writing a check. I started showing up regularly, talking to patients, listening to their stories. I helped set up events, carried supplies, painted walls. Little by little, I got my hands dirty.
At first, Eliza kept her distance. She was polite, but I could tell she still didn't fully trust me. I didn't blame her. Words are easy, actions take time. So I kept at it, showing her, and myself, that I wasn't just the man I used to be. I worked beside her, learned from her. Slowly she began to soften. I'd catch her watching me with a look that wasn't exactly admiration, but it wasn't suspicion either. It was a start. I realized something important during those long hours at the center. For the first time, I felt good about what I was doing, not because it brought me more power or recognition, but because it made a difference. Seeing the kids smile when they painted, hearing the laughter in the hallways, watching people find hope in the programs Eliza ran, it gave me a kind of fulfillment I'd never felt before. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about being part of something bigger than myself, and it felt good. One evening, after everyone else had left the center, Eliza and I sat down to talk. We hadn't had a real conversation since everything happened. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap, her face calm but serious. The silence between us felt heavy.
I need to understand, she said softly. Why did you keep all of that from me? I looked down at my hands. I didn't think you'd want to be around someone like me if you knew the truth, I said. I was scared you'd see me differently. You lied, she said, but her tone wasn't angry, just hurt. You made me trust you, and then you broke it. I know, I said, meeting her eyes. I didn't handle it the right way, but when I realized what I'd done, I wanted to make it right. That's why I started showing up here, trying to help. Not because I wanted anything from you, but because you were right. Helping people feels better than all the money and power in the world. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a long breath. I can see that you've changed, she said. I still don't agree with how you went about it, but I can see that you're trying. I am, I said. More than anything, I just want a chance to show you that I'm not the man I used to be. I want us to start fresh, if you'll let me. She didn't answer right away. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, filling the space between us. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said. We'll start fresh. But I need you to be honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more pretending. No more pretending, I promised. I felt a weight lift from my chest, the kind of relief I hadn't felt in years. Eliza smiled, a small, cautious smile, but it was enough. For the first time, I felt like we were truly moving forward. We didn't rush into anything, but we didn't hold back either. We took the time to talk about what we both wanted, not as a billionaire and a caregiver, but as two people who cared about each other. It wasn't about my wealth or her work anymore. It was about us, about figuring out what kind of life we could build together. As we talked, I realized that I didn't just want to be with Eliza. I wanted to be the kind of person who deserved her trust. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I never thought I'd find peace in the midst of struggle. As the months went on, my illness grew harder to ignore. Some days were easier than others, but I never let it stop me from showing up at the community center. I kept painting with the kids, sharing stories with the patients, and helping Eliza wherever I could. It gave me purpose, something far greater than any business deal or trophy building. Eliza was by my side through it all. She was the first face I saw each morning, her steady presence reminding me that I wasn't alone. Her support meant everything. And it wasn't just her. The community I once knew only as a place to hide had become a family. People who barely knew me a year ago now checked in on me, brought me meals, sat and talked with me about life, and made me feel connected in a way I never had before. As the center thrived, it became clear that this wasn't just my legacy, it was ours. The programs expanded, new classes, more patients, more smiles. It was no longer just a building filled with people, it was a safe haven, a second home. Eliza's passion and my resources combined into something neither of us could have built alone. One afternoon, I stayed back at home while Eliza walked through the center. Heather was used to me just turning to her. She never wore her yoga pants with me. She told me later how the place felt alive. Kids laughing in the art room, patients swapping recipes in the kitchen, and volunteers chatting over coffee in the lounge. It was bustling, vibrant, and full of hope. She stood in the doorway of one of the classrooms, watching a group of teenagers paint murals on the walls. "You made this possible," one of the volunteers said to her. "No," she replied, smiling softly. "Maxwell made it possible. I just helped him see it." Hearing that warmed me. It wasn't about credit or recognition. It was about knowing that something I started had become bigger than me. The people in that building had found support, friendship, and strength because of what Eliza and I had built together. My illness might have taken away my physical strength, but it had also given me a chance to do something meaningful. As my body grew weaker, my heart felt lighter. Hmm. I didn't need the high-rise office or the stock charts to feel successful. Sitting in the center's garden, listening to the wind and the trees and the laughter from inside, I felt more at peace than I ever had in my life. I had no regrets, no fear, just gratitude. And that's the legacy I'll leave. Not the buildings, not the wealth, just the love and the lives we've touched. Oh,